Hello YouTube, this is Ben Gessel. I haven't posted any new videos I know for a bit. Just basically moved recently to a new place. But I believe this is video number 11, right around that range. Could be mistaken, but anyway, so today it's September 11th, I believe, 2016. September 11th, yeah, no less. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about teaching music composition. This is a really kind of can be a tricky, particularly tricky area because music composition is so vast and widespread in its requirements or in its scope. In other words, to be a better that one understands all the elements of music, any kind of skill in music, the better a composer roughly one will be, especially if they have good high abilities in orchestration and melodic writing and that sort of thing. But you know, a complete musician is going to, if they're a composer, there's a better chance that they're going to be a very good musician. By complete, meaning strong performance abilities, strong areas of knowledge of music history, notation, even computer software, but also even conducting sometimes. Well, the more skills, the better when it comes to composition. So let's talk about what students need to know to become better composers, different levels, and everything that, of course, is mentioned here. Teachers should be easily 2 to 3 times, if not more, skilled than the student. The closer the student becomes to the abilities of the teacher, the more. Well, just actually, tell you the truth, it really depends on because composition is such a potentially wide area. It often becomes something where many composers are very skilled in certain areas of music composition, and there's just many people that want to learn or improve their skills in certain areas of composition. But when you get to some very, you can have, of course, a situation where the composer truly is more skilled than students more skilled than the teacher. Even if the teacher has more knowledge in certain areas of music composition, it sometimes results in a not good situation. But and degrees don't always guarantee competence. They can, but not necessarily. There are many people with PhDs and master's degrees who are not very good composers. They might know a fair amount, and they might be very, very intelligent, but they're still not truly very good composers. Not even as good as some folks, even with no bachelor's degree. So it just all depends. It depends on what someone's real skill levels are. But let's get into some of this stuff here. So I'm coming at this from a little bit different angle than some folks would. But first off, some of this might seem kind of obvious, but it still goes without saying. There's a greater need when you're teaching composition to teach a variety of skills. A greater need for that than if you're teaching an instrument or even music theory. You need to, especially if you're teaching younger students, anyone over, because composition really shouldn't be taught, in my opinion, until someone becomes about 11 or 12, the youngest. And for very bright kids, you can get down to about 8, 9, or 10, but that's pushing it sometimes. Composition is true, it's a more advanced kind of skill. It's very, very, very difficult to teach composition sometimes to younger kids, unless you're approaching it more from a very basic music theory standpoint, and just very, very short pieces, that sort of thing. So, the first skill that students need to be taught, it just has to do with a very thorough understanding of music theory and counterpoint. And counterpoint is simply just the whole process, with the whole structure of how different melodies relate to each other melodically. If you have more than one melody, you have more than one moving line, polyphony basically. But there needs to be instruction in music theory, and that theory, whatever you're teaching in theory, it should be directly tied in with composition. And now, music theory, a lot of times, music theory is taught in everywhere, and everyone needs it in music. It's just one of those basics. But when you're teaching music theory as part of a training in composition, you really should go into a little bit more detail regarding things like, the structure or the nature of tonal harmony, 1, 4, 5 chords, tonic, subdominant, dominant functions, and also the harmonies that are maybe just not part of those three categories, or you need to have go into a little more detail, I think. And again, it depends on the student's age. If you're talking about, again, 8, 9, 10 years old, 11 years old, I'd say probably 9, 10, 11. If the student has had a few years of instruction on an instrument, you certainly can start out with very basic music theory and just assign 4 to 8 bar melodic assignments, really from very basic chord progression with that, especially to get into the 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old range. And of course, my opinion, you teach avant-garde style, anything the avant-garde, you really want to start doing that if the student's interested, especially in the teen years at the earliest. Students really should have more of a grounding with tonal music, and especially with hearing more consonant harmony before you move on to more dissonant, more complex harmony or anything like that. But yeah, music theory is huge. What I'm talking about more of a practical approach to music theory. And that should be the case across the board. But you really need to talk about how different chord progressions go well or accompany certain kinds of melodies a little better, certain kinds of moods. This is the meat of so much of what we should be talking about, especially with younger students or teenage students. Not just college. And a lot of times you don't get composition training until you go to college and you're very advanced, or essentially, virtually a pre-professional, professional level musician. And it shouldn't necessarily be the case. Students should be composers should have much more, ideally more instruction when they're younger. So all the different areas of music theory: melody, harmony, rhythm, texture, timbre, form, and of course dynamics is what you do with timbre and tempo and things. And all these different elements of music should be addressed quite thoroughly, especially things like rhythm, harmony, and we'll get to melody more here in a second, timbre and things. But so the student really should have also a fair amount of training, ear training, develop their relative pitch, if possible, even perfect pitch. And the piano should be used quite a bit. Every music composition instructor should be using a piano of some sort, especially with younger students. But so I mean, from my experience, you really need to spend at least 5 to 10 minutes a day, 5 to 10 minutes per lesson, just reviewing intervals and harmonies and things, testing students and these things, and have them work on those things during the week as well. You need to also, this is a skill that goes neglected quite a bit. You need to teach students, and this is more like a grammar kind of side of music composition, and with the advent of music software, computer software, I know the skill is very undervalued, but it still is extremely important. You need to teach students correct notation, and there's a book that's very handy here. It's just called Music Notation. It's a Music Notation by Gardner Reed, and that's one of the best. There's certainly others out there, but that's more, I know it's more advanced material, more college level, high school, college. But students should understand, the stem for quarter notes and half notes and eighth notes and things goes to the middle line of the bar, middle line of the staff. It always goes to the middle line, whether it's going up or down, and things like that. And if you have notes on ledger lines, that stem needs to be a little longer. You don't want to have stems that don't quite reach the staff and that sort of thing, because they're way off the staff. And when to use 8VA, 15MA, all these kinds of things. So notation, correct notation, should be a part of music composition training, and that should be treated as a homework assignment for older kids, especially, and for teens, as well as even college level, depending how professors will teach. But notation again is a very neglected. It's I can't even talk straight. It's a neglected skill. Anyway, this might seem a little unrelated to music composition, but there should be some understanding of music history as well, in the development of style, different kinds of styles of music. The reason why this is important has to do with just what it is important to know how different kinds of music developed from one style to another style to the next style. It's very important. It's important to know where the composer himself or herself fits into the grand scheme of things. To know what it is that you like the most in music, of course, but how that fits in with which, like for instance, of your favorite composers or one of the students' favorite composers, who were their primary teachers or who influenced them the most, then who influenced them the most, and that sort of thing. We don't always get this. Again, music theory, music history is often taught in a very formal way, or very theoretical. Music theory, it's a very theoretical way. It's not always taught in a very practical way. Music history, again, if it's taught in college, it's very much that way. And there's, it's great to have instruction that's individual in music composition, where music history is addressed, and when a student's favorite composers are addressed, and then the student finds out who the teachers of those composers were. Even when the music student asks the instructor, well, who are your teachers, or what styles do you like the most, the teacher should be able to explain to the student, I tend to write more on these styles, and these were my teachers, and these were the folks that influenced them, or these are the folks with my favorite composers, these are the folks that influenced them the most. So there should be some knowledge there, at least some knowledge. A composer doesn't have to be a historian, but again, composition is a very broad skill area. So I mentioned this before, but it bears repeating. A student should have a growing understanding of different harmonic or chord progressions, as well as different kinds of textures. And the word texture is it can mean more than one thing. It can, but essentially one definition of texture is the density of music, how many things are going on at once. If you have more than one melody, that's a certain kind of texture. Polyphony is texture, or monophony, homophony, heterophony. These are all different kinds of textures. But you can also have different ongoing patterns or ongoing repeating kinds of musical figures, ostinatos. You have Alberti bass and a waltz bass. So these are accompaniment patterns. And accompaniment patterns have relation with texture as well. So texture is kind of, and there's maybe even a few other things that texture relates to as well. But it's just kind of the, we'll say texture is like the background of music, whatever's going on in the background. And form is how a piece of music is organized, how it's laid out time-wise. First part, how it develops. So form and texture are kind of like the architecture of music in a way, in a broader sense or general sense. But the student needs to understand, again, more and more different kinds of chord progressions and how they work. Not just that there's the basic ones, tonic, subdominant, dominant, tonic, and those basic chord progressions should be emphasized for younger students, of course, or less skilled students, and you should keep building on that. Keep building on the foundation of tonal music. And also, there should be a lot of explanation about how harmonic progressions and style and different rhythms and different textures relate to melody, different kinds of melodies. If a student comes up with a melody, for instance, it's important, it's vital. It's a vital skill for a student has a good melody to know what works the best for that melody, and also to have more than one chord progression, more than one way of writing it out with textures. That sort of, there should be more than one way of treating a melody, of course, but students should know, have an increasing understanding of how to treat different kinds of melodies. It's like the skill that comes. How does a student know, for instance, that a piece is in 3/4/4/4? Well, they have to have an innate sense of rhythm. They have to develop their sense of rhythm and meter, and for instance, and so in a way, so composition lessons are not always taught at younger students, teen students, but the skills that are often gained from private instruction on an instrument or in ensembles and all these things, they all will directly relate, as well as music listening, absorbing music, they all directly relate to any later training in music composition. In fact, a lot of times they have a much stronger influence on and impact on the students' abilities at a later point, even more so than composition lessons. This is a very sad and regrettable kind of thing to mention, but and this is why composition lessons, whether or not this is a formal lesson at college, or this is a private lesson in a student's home or teacher studio, or some other situation, regardless of what it is, composition lessons should, in my opinion, be a good deal of a student's should influence a student's abilities, a great deal of students' abilities, more so than they often do. Personally, I cringe when I think of the competition instructors that simply will have a student write a piece and will just critique it until the quarter's over or whatever. And that kind of teaching is almost worthless. if the especially if the student doesn't value it very much. And so, in my opinion, there should be no situation. There should be no situation where a teacher is teaching not at their best, because essentially you're hurting the students' training. Even again, whether or not it's a class in college, or it's something privately, or again, it's maybe a music academy, whatever it is, whatever the situation is. There's no excuse for a teacher not to teach their best, or not to put in their full abilities there. So there should be an understanding of timbre and orchestration, a growing knowledge of timbre and orchestration, and how they work together, how different instruments work together. Balance. If you're combining trumpets and flutes and some other instruments, or just or violins and clarinets, and what instrument tends to be louder than the other, and also there should be a growing understanding of how different registers and instruments themselves. So if you're going to write something for flute but it's very low, you're going to have to really scale back everything else, because that flute's going to have a hard time cutting through the rest of the orchestra, the rest of the ensemble, and that lower range. But of course the bassoon and the oboe will have an easy time cutting through the lower range, and but this kind of knowledge, especially just to be able to just say it just as is, it can only be gained via reading, but more especially composing and hearing it in instruments. You have to. These are all things that should be worked on in composition lessons. And so for younger students, again, some of this stuff we can't get into as much, but to a certain extent, you should at least start introducing these ideas, especially when a student becomes about a serious composition student. Use a little bit on the brighter side, especially when they turn about, I'd say 12, 13, or 14 for the brightest kids. Some kids a little bit earlier, but that's a very small percentage. There should be daily practice in actually writing things. Aside from an assignment that is given by the teacher to the student should be writing music every day, and really pushing themselves, trying either new things, trying the same things, but trying to increase, improving their ability to write memorable melodies, different kinds of motions, just different kinds of things. By different, I don't necessarily mean strikingly or remarkably different. Or I don't necessarily mean something that's completely original. These are ideas that the avant-garde has really latched onto. A student doesn't have to write something that is unlike anything else that's ever been written before in order for that piece to be really worthwhile. Again, this is an avant-garde idea. It's an idea in modern classical music that it has some merit, but it's been overblown quite a bit. A good melody is a good melody. A good melody is a good melody, and if you want to take someone else's word for that, take Darius Milhaud. Just take Milhaud's word for it. But that's just one of many, many composers. A good melody, good music with a good melody is going to be good. It's going to be high quality, regardless of what anyone else says. But a student should be always trying to expand and improve on what they can do, whether it's something. A student might say, "Oh, this melody is okay," and there should be a drive to the next day say, "I'm going to write something better." Now, it might seem like it's really very expecting a lot to have a student, and teacher too, but a student write every single day. Well, you're supposed to practice every day, right? It's the same thing with composition, even if it's just a little bit. If you skip a day or two, you need to do more next time, or you need to be involved. If not writing, then you need to be involved in something involving imaginative, original, creative thought in music. There needs to be something going on there. Otherwise, well, and sometimes you get really busy. That's very true. But that should be a big deal when taking composition lessons. It should be something daily. There should be daily practice going on. That's why, of course, students need books on orchestration, like Orchestration and Instrumentation by Alfred Blatter, and Music Notation by Gardner Reed, and if so desired, the other books on, say, avant-garde music, as well as there's many other books that you can look at as well. But students need reference materials. They need blank staff paper, blank sheet music paper, and not only regular music paper, but staff paper with more space between the staves if they want to really work on their slurs and make them not too flat, but correct notation. And then orchestra staff paper. It's good practice even though it takes a long time writing out music for orchestra or chamber orchestra or other ensembles like band or wind ensemble, choir. Yes, computer software is really great because you can do all these things very quickly. But again, the skills relating to calligraphy and music notation continue to be important because computer software still might be errors with the program. Software doesn't always guarantee correct notation, the way things are done, and that can be very, very frustrating. And that's an ongoing kind of thing. That's why there's different kinds of Sibelius 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. And Finale, different kinds of. And so a lot of their improvements are not necessarily notation related, but some of them have been. But you should know, the student should know what cross beaming is. What's cross beaming? Or, many other kind of situations like that. Tuplets, how to write them. So there should be, and this is the part of music composition that gets into the spiritual and the emotional, the internal, the introspective, and just no teacher can really. This is where the student really needs to shine, ideally, but the student should be, as much as possible, encouraged by the instructor to find their own melodies and their own voice. But that's a very vague term. What a teacher really should do is encourage a student to listen to as many different composers as possible, especially those composers that the student finds very appealing. But still, the student needs to keep looking for new composers that they can be influenced by, or they might be influenced by. And so the music teacher, music instructor, should have a huge number of composers that they know about, ideally. If a music composition teacher only knows 100 composers, only 100, really, well, so a student starts writing a certain style, the composition teacher the teacher says, "Oh, that's great. I really don't understand the style very well. Oh, geez, I'm up a creek. I'm going to, of course, because we often do this, we do a lot of ad-libbing, we do a lot of faking it, and this has been discussed in many different articles, music composition, because you can do that a little bit. It's a little easier to do that in composition. But what a composition instructor really should do is, in the case of a student writing something that is much less familiar to a teacher, or there's less knowledge that a teacher has, then the teacher really should take some time to look into that style, just to have a little bit more, just to be more the teacher. Now, it's very unlikely for anyone to have a very, very high level of knowledge in all areas of music. So if you come across someone who has more than a PhD level, or a very, 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 very advanced level of knowledge in early music and Baroque and classical styles and all the different forms and everything in dances and everything, and plus all the romantic styles and all the different modern styles and jazz and pop, rock and everything else, and country and blues. Oh my gosh, that takes almost a whole lifetime to develop a really high level of knowledge. So it's almost impractical. There are folks and that's why composition teachers are very specialized. But there are, and I would include myself in this number, definitely. But there are instructors that have a considerable level of knowledge in a variety of different levels, different areas of music. And it's just a question of how deep does that knowledge go, really. Uh, so, but again, the student should always be writing, working on their own ability to write good melodies. And I also personally don't believe that the best melodies come when students are younger. They can come at any time. It's just that when you get older, in my limited experience, somewhat limited, it's a little more difficult to try new things, perhaps. You have more of a comfort zone that you've been doing in your life, and older folks are just more creatures of habit. That's essentially the best way of putting it. And so composition is generally taught to very advanced, professional level musicians. Of course, it's a very, very difficult skill to master, or even to do well in. Very, very difficult. To be a good composer. But there still should be more inclusion of beginners and intermediate level musicians with regards to composition instruction, especially with regard to the development of the aforementioned skills. And so many of the things that are taught in Music Theory 101, or the first year music theory, and some of the basics of music history, ear training, all these things. What's stopping a teacher from teaching those things to younger students? Well, nothing. They should be taught. It's just that if you're talking about music theory instruction in music composition standpoint, there should be a very practical. Let's use this skill. Let's use this knowledge in this piece. Let's use this 1-4-5-1 chord progression in a melody. I didn't mention this earlier, but there's a number of different ways of writing melodies, and a teacher can help a student start to write melodies by talking about some of the different kinds of melodies that are out there. Whether it's a question and answer type of thing, or it's a sequence where you have the same essentially rhythm, but you're just changing the pitches by moving up a step or down a step or something, and the harmony has a nice flow to it, or some other kind of structure, some other kind of melody. There should be some of that's included in the lessons, but the student themselves should push themselves to find their own melodies again. And so lastly, there should be some instruction in nature of music business, networking, and in this area, again, it's just a question of what the teacher themselves knows. And so hopefully that makes a bit more sense. And I did not mention this at the outset, but I did have a specific audience with this video, and really it's more anybody who's considering teaching music composition, especially to younger students, but anyone who just feels like they could use something a little different with how they're teaching composition. But it's in my experience, music composition is often very lacking. You can have a lot of instructors that are very intelligent and may do very well in their own area of writing, but they're not always very good teachers. They don't always explain things very, very well, and they don't really have very high expectations of their students. And these are some of the problems in music composition. So I'm addressing younger teachers as well as composers, but also to an extent I'm addressing the more seasoned teachers that feel like, well, maybe they should be upping their game a little bit with what their effectiveness of their teaching. Ultimately, it comes down to, when you're older, somewhat older, when you've taught a fair number of composition students, especially more advanced and professional level, what are those folks doing? And what's your legacy? And sometimes you won't really know how effective you were until close to death. Anyway, So hopefully this video helps some of you guys out there, and I'm sure that even if you're not a composer or composition teacher, I know some of this will help other music teachers. Let me know if you have any questions, any comments, that sort of thing. I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks. Bye.